Far away, beyond the quiet edges of human space, something unusual happened. A soundless cry for help, carried not by voice but by radio waves, drifted through the blackness of the universe. It was weak, broken, and nearly swallowed by the endless void, but it was there, a desperate SOS. The signal had traveled for weeks, maybe months, across the stars. It came from a planet that most of the galaxy had forgotten, a place marked on maps with a warning, Deathworld. Deathworlds were not ordinary planets. They were places where everything seemed to fight for survival. The air was dangerous, the ground unstable, the creatures vicious. Most species in the galaxy never went near such places. They believed no one could live there for long. Yet somehow, on this particular Deathworld, a small colony had been built. People had tried to carve out a life, to survive against all odds. But now, their voices were fading, reaching out to anyone who might listen. The SOS itself was haunting. It carried no details of names or numbers, only short, repeated bursts. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. There was panic hidden in the static, fear buried in the repeating words. Whoever had sent it had likely been working with failing equipment, their hands shaking, maybe bleeding, while trying to keep the message alive. The signal was not steady. Sometimes it flickered, as if the machines themselves were dying. But even in its broken state, it carried something powerful, hope. The signal was first picked up by alien trading ships passing through nearby sectors. They logged it, analyzed it, and quickly dismissed it. Deathworld, they said. Not worth the risk. Those colonies never lasted. To them, it was as though a whisper had come from a graveyard. Why bother answering? They carried on, filing their reports but never changing their course. Later, the signal reached outposts of the Galactic Council, the great governing body where countless species gathered to discuss law, trade, and security. When the council technicians decoded the weak message, they forwarded it to their leaders. In the grand chamber of the council, it was played aloud. The words filled the hall, echoing off the shining walls. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. The aliens seated around the circular chamber shifted uncomfortably. Some shook their heads, some whispered to each other. This is a Deathworld colony, one delegate said. They should have known better. To send a fleet there would be madness, said another. Even if we arrive, there will be nothing left. One by one, the voices joined in. Reasons stacked upon reasons. Too far, too dangerous, too hopeless. None of them wanted to risk their own ships or their own people for what they believed was already lost. To them, the cry for help was only an echo of the doomed. And so, the council began to move on. They discussed other matters, trade disputes, border patrols, minor wars brewing in distant arms of the galaxy. The SOS was written down as a record but set aside. Officially, nothing would be done. But the signal did not stop. Out in the darkness, it kept traveling. Across dust clouds, across cold and empty space, it moved. Until, finally, it reached human space. For humans, the signal felt different. Earth itself had once been called a death world. It was a planet filled with storms, predators, and diseases that other species thought impossible to endure. But humans had grown there, fought there, and learned how to survive. They understood what it meant to live where the world itself seemed against you. And more than that, they understood what it meant to call for help. When the signal was detected by human listening stations, the technicians didn't dismiss it. They froze. They replayed it. They listened again, hearing the fear in the voice, the desperation in the static. The recordings were rushed up the chain of command. Soon, generals and admirals, presidents and chancellors, sat in dark rooms, staring at the words on screens. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. No one in those rooms spoke quickly. No one treated it lightly. Because humanity remembered their own history. Times when their ancestors had sent out cries for help during wars, famines, and disasters, sometimes answered and sometimes ignored. They remembered the feeling of being abandoned. And they remembered the feeling of someone arriving just in time to save them. The SOS touched something deep inside the human heart. It was not just a call for help from strangers. It was a reminder of who humans were. They were survivors of a death world themselves. And if there was one thing humans could never turn away from, it was someone else struggling to survive against impossible odds. The technicians at the stations kept the signal alive, boosting it, studying it, trying to find the exact coordinates. Across the fleet, whispers began to spread. A call for help had come. A cry from the dark. Someone out there was under attack, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. The question was no longer whether the colony was worth saving. To humans, the only question was simple. How fast can we get there? The SOS still repeated, endlessly looping across the void. But now, for the first time, there was hope that someone was listening. And not just anyone. Humanity was listening. In the heart of the galaxy, the council chamber shone with cold light. It was a place where the most powerful civilizations gathered, each species sending their finest leaders to speak for them. Marble floors reflected the glow of towering holographic screens, and the great circle of seats stretched wide, filled with alien faces of every shape and size. This was where laws were made, wars were avoided, and decisions that shaped the galaxy were taken. On that day, the council was already in session when the weak SOS from the Deathworld colony was brought in. A technician placed the recording into the central system, and the words filled the hall. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. The voice was faint, broken by static, but every delegate could hear the desperation in it. The chamber grew quiet. For a few seconds, no one spoke. They listened to the repeated cry echo again and again, as if the stars themselves were begging. Then, slowly, the silence cracked. It is from a death world, one reptilian delegate hissed. Why would anyone try to live there? They chose their fate. A tall, insectoid alien clicked its mandibles together. To send a rescue would be wasteful. The predators that live on those worlds are beyond control. Even if survivors remain, they will not last long enough for us to arrive. A bird-like species rustled its feathers, shaking its head. Our fleets are stretched thin. We cannot risk lives and ships for a doomed cause. Too far. Too dangerous. Too hopeless. Around the chamber, nods followed. One after another, delegates spoke, their voices adding to a rising tide of dismissal. They were not cruel, not entirely. To them, the logic was simple. Deathworlds were cursed. Colonies there never survived. Why throw away resources on something that had already been lost? The words repeated again in the chamber. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. A few even looked away, their eyes fixed on the floor or the glowing walls. They could hear the terror in the voice, but they buried it beneath reason. The galaxy, after all, was filled with problems. Fleets were needed to guard trade routes, to patrol borders, to fight pirates and raiders. Why risk ships for a single colony, forgotten on a hostile world? So the debate continued. Voices rose, arguments clashed, but all of them circled back to the same answer: do nothing. And yet, while the hall buzzed with noise, one section of the chamber remained silent. The human seat. The representative of humanity sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the projection of the broken signal. The words looped again. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. The human said nothing. This silence unsettled the others more than any speech could have. Delegates who had just spoken turned to glance at the human representative. They knew that humans had a history with deathworlds. After all, their home planet, Earth, was considered one of the most dangerous inhabited worlds in the galaxy. The council often whispered about how strange it was that humanity had risen from such a brutal cradle. Storms, earthquakes, predators, diseases, things that would have destroyed other species had only made humans stronger. The silence stretched on. The human did not argue, did not shout, did not try to convince the council. They simply sat, listening, their face unreadable. A smaller alien, a timid aquatic species, finally broke the quiet with a soft voice. Perhaps, Perhaps we should at least send a scout ship. The idea was quickly drowned out. Pointless, another snapped. By the time a scout arrives, all will be lost. The debate dragged for hours. Reports were read, maps were displayed, calculations of travel times and fuel costs filled the air. Every possible excuse was pulled forward and laid bare. In the end, the council voted. The final decision was as cold as the stars themselves. No action would be taken. The SOS would be recorded, noted in archives, and forgotten. Officially, it would be described as a tragedy beyond intervention. Unofficially, it would be nothing more than another voice lost in the void. The technician closed the signal display. The voice faded. The council chamber moved on to its next item on the agenda, discussing taxes on trade lanes and patrol schedules. To them, the matter was finished. But in the human section, the representative remained motionless. Their silence was not forgetfulness, it was memory. Humans remembered what it was like to cry out for help and hear nothing in return. They remembered wars where allies turned away, disasters where no aid came, battles fought alone. They remembered standing on ruined ground, wondering if anyone would answer. And they remembered how it felt when, just once, someone did. The silence of the council was not shared by humanity. While the chamber moved on, human channels back on Earth lit up with reports. The SOS had reached them, and their leaders were already discussing it. For the other species, the matter was closed. For humans, the matter was only just beginning. That silence in the council chamber was not weakness. It was a promise forming quietly, a storm waiting to rise. The galaxy thought the voice crying for help had been ignored. But deep inside, humans were already preparing their answer. The signal had been heard, and humanity would not remain silent. While the Galactic Council had chosen to move on, the same was not true for humanity. The moment the SOS reached Earth and the surrounding colonies, it spread like wildfire through military networks, command stations, and political offices. Everyone who heard it stopped what they were doing. Officers replayed it. Leaders leaned closer to their screens. Soldiers stood still, listening. It was only a few broken words. Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us. But to humanity, it was enough. Meetings were called in secure chambers deep under cities. Admirals gathered in steel-walled war rooms, their uniforms crisp, their eyes sharp. Generals laid out maps, holograms, and projections of the sector where the distress call had come from. Civilian leaders were invited too, presidents, prime ministers, and chancellors, each carrying the weight of their nations on their shoulders. The question before them was simple. Do we answer? At first, the discussion was cautious. Some argued for patience. The council has already spoken, one minister said. If we go against their ruling, it will cause problems. Another pointed out the risks. We don't even know what is attacking the colony. It could be an enemy far stronger than us. Sending one ship might not be enough. Sending a fleet might mean war. But every time hesitation filled the room, the recording was played again. That fragile voice, cut by static, begging for help. And each time it was played, silence followed. No one could escape the sound of it. Finally, one admiral leaned forward, her hand pressed on the table. We all know the council won't act. They've made that clear. But we are not the council. We are human. And if there is even one chance that people out there are alive, it is our duty to answer. If it were us, if Earth sent out a cry for help, would we want silence in return? The room grew heavy with her words. Around the table, heads began to nod. Humans had always been stubborn, unwilling to turn away from a fight or from a call for aid. Their history was full of wars where ordinary people had stood up against impossible odds, not because they thought they would win, but because it was the right thing to do. The decision came quickly after that. Humanity would not send one ship. They would not send a token scout or a half-hearted attempt. They would send dreadnoughts, the pride of their fleets, the most powerful ships they had ever built. Orders spread like lightning across human space. Dreadnought captains received sealed transmissions. Hangars buzzed with activity as engineers prepared engines, weapons, and supply lines. Soldiers were called back from leave, medics were summoned, crews were assembled. One by one, the massive warships began to awaken. Each dreadnought was more than just metal and guns. They were floating cities, with thousands of crew members aboard. They carried fighter squadrons, dropships, armored vehicles, and vast reserves of supplies. When a dreadnought moved, it was like a continent tearing itself free and flying into the stars. To send one was a statement of power. To send several was a message that could not be ignored. Word of this decision spread quickly, as it always does. Civilian news outlets began to whisper about a fleet moving. Aliens on human worlds raised their crests, antennae, or brows in shock. Was it true? Was humanity really sending dreadnoughts just to answer a fading SOS? The council heard the rumors too. In their grand chambers, alarm rippled through the delegates. They cannot be serious, one delegate muttered. An entire fleet? For what? For a doomed colony. Others shook their heads. Humans are reckless. They will drag us into disaster. Yet beneath their frustration was something else. Fear. Because if humans were truly mobilizing their dreadnoughts, it meant they were ready to unleash force on a level few species had ever dared to. But humanity did not explain itself. No speeches were given to the council. No apologies were made. Quietly, with steady determination, the fleet prepared to depart. To them, no permission was needed. No debate was required. A call for help had been made, and that was enough. In the barracks of the dreadnoughts, soldiers checked their rifles and armor. They did not know who had sent the SOS or what enemies they would face. All they knew was that someone needed saving. And that was enough for them. Medics packed their kits with bandages, medicines, and supplies, preparing for the wounded they would surely find. Pilots ran through checklists in their fighters, their eyes hard with focus. On Earth, crowds gathered at spaceports and launch bays, watching as the colossal ships rose into the sky. Families waved flags. Children pointed upward, their eyes wide with wonder. For them, the sight of dreadnoughts leaving orbit was more than military action. It was proof of who humans were. They would not stay silent. They would not leave others to die. As the fleet assembled in the blackness of space, their engines glowed like stars being born. One by one, the dreadnoughts aligned in formation, their weapons armed, their shields powered, their crews ready. The order came through the command channel, calm and simple. Set course for the source of the signal. The stars stretched into lines as the ships leapt into faster-than-light travel. Humanity had decided. Where others saw hopelessness, they saw duty. Where others turned away, they moved forward. An entire fleet of dreadnoughts thundered into the void, answering the call that no one else would. Far away, the broken SOS still repeated, fading, flickering, a whisper against the endless dark. Soon, it would no longer be alone. Soon, the cry would be met with the roar of humanity's arrival. The fleet of dreadnoughts moved like giants through the darkness of space. Each ship was so massive that whole cities could have fit inside them. They were built for war, for survival, and for journeys that stretched across the stars. Now, those giants had only one purpose: to answer the desperate cry for help that echoed endlessly in their comms. Inside the dreadnoughts, life was both calm and tense. Crews worked in silence, following routines that had been drilled into them for years. Engineers walked the long steel corridors, checking engines that burned brighter than suns. Mechanics tightened bolts, tested shields, and recalibrated weapons. Medics prepared the infirmaries, laying out rows of beds, syringes, and equipment, knowing they would soon face wounded survivors. Pilots ran through checklists in their hangars, eyes steady as they looked at the sleek fighters waiting like coiled predators. Every person aboard understood the importance of their mission. They were not flying to protect their own planet, not heading into a war declared by governments. They were answering a voice from the dark, a voice that might already be gone. Yet not a single crew member doubted the decision. Humans had always believed that no cry for help should go unanswered. The journey itself was long. To cross the vast emptiness, the Dreadnoughts had to leap through faster-than-light travel, jumping from one star system to another. Each jump was a moment of silence followed by a blur of light, as the stars stretched and folded around them. In those seconds, time felt unreal, like the universe itself held its breath. Then the ships would emerge again, steady and unshaken, pushing forward. Between the jumps, the crews filled the time as best they could. Some trained, running drills in the wide chambers of the Dreadnoughts, practicing for battles they knew might come. Others sat in the mess halls, eating in silence or talking quietly about what might await them at the colony. A few wrote messages to families back home, knowing there was always a chance they might not return. In the command bridges, the admirals and captains stood at their posts, eyes fixed on the glowing maps projected before them. They watched the faint red marker that showed the source of the SOS, still flickering weakly across space. Each hour, the signal grew fainter. It was like a candle slowly burning out, and they knew they were racing against time. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, the crews would listen to the recording itself. The static-filled voice repeated, "Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us." It was haunting, but it kept their purpose sharp. Every time someone heard it, their jaws tightened, their hands clenched, and their hearts burned with determination. Outside the Dreadnoughts, the void of space stretched endlessly. Stars shimmered like frozen sparks, and nebulae glowed with faint colors. It was beautiful, but also cold and merciless. The galaxy did not care if a colony lived or died. The Council had already turned away. But the humans pressed on, their ships cutting through the void like blades of light. There were dangers along the journey. In some sectors, pirate raiders appeared, hoping to ambush the fleet. But when their sensors revealed the size of the human formation, they vanished back into the shadows without a fight. No pirate dared to test a wall of Dreadnoughts. In other regions, strange anomalies twisted space, threatening to tear ships apart. Carefully, with skilled navigation, the fleet adjusted its course and avoided disaster. Through it all, the Dreadnoughts stayed together, never breaking formation. They moved as one, each ship supporting the others, each crew member bound by the same silent promise. They would reach the source of the signal, no matter the cost. As the days passed, conversations spread among the soldiers. Who had sent the SOS? Were they humans, stranded far from home? Or were they another species, ignored by their own council? Would anyone still be alive when they arrived? Or would they find only ruins? The uncertainty weighed heavily, but it never broke their resolve. One young soldier in the barracks asked his commander, "Sir, what if we arrive too late?" The commander looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Then we will still go. Because even if we cannot save them, the galaxy must know this. Humans came. We answered. And no one will ever say we turned our backs." Those words spread quickly, repeated in whispers across the fleet. They became almost a vow, carried from one soldier to another, from engineers to pilots, from captains to medics. Even if they were too late, they would show the galaxy what humanity stood for. The journey stretched on. Each jump brought them closer. Each hour the SOS weakened, but it was still there, still calling. The colony had not fallen silent yet, and as long as that faint voice existed, the humans would keep racing toward it. On the final day before arrival, the admirals gathered their officers. Orders were given clearly, calmly. Weapons were to be armed. Fighters were to be ready. Dropships were to stand by for evacuation or combat landings. Every dreadnought prepared for battle. Because none of them believed the colony had fallen to something small. Whatever was attacking, it had to be dangerous. And humanity would meet it head-on. As the fleet lined up for the last jump, the signal came through one more time, weaker than ever, almost fading into silence. "Please help us. We are under attack. Please help us." The Admiral's voice carried across every ship, steady and strong. "This is why we came. This is who we are. Stand ready. We answer now." The stars bent, the void warped, and the dreadnoughts leapt forward together, carrying with them the hopes of a colony on the edge of extinction and the unshakable will of humanity. The human fleet came out of faster-than-light travel, and before them stretched the broken remains of a world. The planet filled their screens, scarred and burning. Once, it had been green, with forests, oceans, and cities carved by hopeful settlers. Now it was wounded. Smoke rose into space like black scars, fires burned across continents, and the faint glow of explosions dotted the night side. Around the planet, the orbit told its own story. Wreckage floated in silence, shattered satellites, broken defense platforms, and the twisted remains of civilian ships that had tried to escape but never made it. Some pieces still sparked with dying energy, drifting slowly in the void. Others carried markings of the colony, names of ships that had once carried families and supplies, now nothing but debris. The dreadnought crews watched in silence. No one spoke as the sight filled their eyes. The faint SOS had prepared them for danger, but the reality was worse than expected. This was no small raid. This was devastation. Sensors soon detected movement. Orbiting the planet were enemy ships, sleek, sharp, and predatory in design. Their hulls were black, absorbing the light, their weapons glowing faintly red. These were no ordinary raiders. These were the predators feared across the galaxy, a species known for hunting colonies like animals hunt prey. They did not fight wars for territory or resources. They hunted for dominance, for blood, for the simple power of destruction. Now they circled the planet like vultures, waiting for the last signs of resistance to die. The human admirals stood tall on their bridges. Reports flooded in. The enemy fleet was large, more than enough to overwhelm a colony's defenses. Yet when the humans counted their own ships, their numbers were strong, their dreadnoughts powerful. For the first time, perhaps, the predators would face someone who did not run. But before the battle, the humans looked down at the surface. Scanners pierced the atmosphere, revealing the tragedy below. Cities had been reduced to ruins. Towers lay broken, streets torn apart by bombardment. Fires burned in endless stretches, covering the skies with smoke. And yet, in the middle of the ruins, there were signs of life. Small groups of survivors huddled in underground shelters, their signals faint but still present. Some had carved out hiding places in broken subways or half-collapsed bunkers. Others had gathered in caves, waiting for death or salvation. The scans picked up movement, weak heartbeats, desperate voices on local comms, short bursts of messages too faint to reach space. They were still alive. The crews felt the weight of it. Somewhere down there, men, women, and children were holding on, waiting for a miracle. And above, the predators circled, confident no help would come. One officer whispered what everyone felt: "We came just in time." The admirals gave orders quickly. The dreadnoughts began to shift formation, their massive bodies blocking the planet from the predator fleet. Weapons came online. Engines burned brighter. Shields glowed faintly as power surged through them. The humans were not here to watch. They were here to fight. But still, the sight of the ruined world lingered. For some soldiers, it brought memories of Earth's own wars, of cities bombed, people fleeing, the weak left behind. They felt anger rising in their chests. For others, it brought sorrow. How many lives had already been lost? How many children had cried their last tears before the predators came? In the hangars, soldiers prepared to drop. They loaded rifles, checked armor, and secured medical kits. Medics packed stretchers, knowing they would carry the broken out of the fire. Pilots climbed into fighters, glancing once at the planet below. For them, it was not just another battlefield. It was a graveyard where survivors were still trapped, waiting to be freed. The predators noticed the human fleet now. Their ships began to move, forming attack lines. They were not afraid. They had crushed colonies before, and they believed they would do it again. To them, the dreadnoughts were only new prey, larger than most but prey all the same. But the humans thought differently. They did not come for glory, or conquest, or blood. They came for the survivors. They came because a voice had asked for help, and that was reason enough. On the bridges, tension filled the air. Commanders stood with steady voices, giving orders as the first enemy signals locked onto them. The moment had come. They had found the ruins of a world, but within those ruins still lived people who had not given up. Humanity had arrived not a moment too soon. The Admiral's voice rang through every ship, clear and unshakable. The colony still lives. The enemy is before us. We came to answer the call, and we will not fail. Outside, the void darkened as the fleets faced each other, a storm about to break. The ruins of the world below burned silently, as if watching, waiting for the outcome. Above it, in the endless black, humanity prepared to unleash its fury. The ruins told a story of destruction, of hopelessness, of abandonment. But now a new story was beginning. The survivors on the ground, huddled in darkness, would soon hear the thunder of Dreadnought cannons above. And for the first time since their nightmare began, they would know they were not alone. Humanity had come. The Predators made the first move. Their ships broke formation and swept forward like a tide of blades, sleek and black against the stars. Their weapons flared with crimson light, firing lances of energy that streaked across the void. They were confident, as they had always been. To them, this was only another hunt, another broken colony, another victory. They had no reason to believe it would end differently. But this time, they faced humanity. The Dreadnoughts answered with fire. Cannons roared, hurling shells the size of buildings through the dark. Railguns spat streaks of white light that tore through enemy shields as if they were paper. Missiles launched in waves, leaving trails of fire as they streaked toward the Predator fleet. The silence of space was broken by violence so vast it shook the heavens. The first Predator ships exploded in blossoms of flame, torn apart before they could even adjust. Their formations faltered, confusion rippling through their lines. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. On the bridges of the Dreadnoughts, humans worked with calm precision. Orders flew back and forth, targeting systems locked onto new enemies, and defenses adjusted with every strike. Shields flared as enemy fire slammed against them, but the Dreadnoughts held strong. They were built to endure, built to fight wars far greater than this. The Predators tried to regroup, launching their own swarms of missiles and fighters. Small craft buzzed like angry insects, diving toward the Dreadnoughts. But human interceptors shot out from the hangars, sleek and fast, their pilots sharp-eyed and unyielding. Dogfights lit up the skies, streaks of fire chasing fire, until Predator fighters fell burning into the void. In the command chair of the lead Dreadnought, the Admiral's face was calm but her eyes burned with fury. She watched as enemy ships twisted and broke under the onslaught. Every strike, every explosion, was not just a victory, it was justice. The Predators had slaughtered innocents, burned cities, and laughed at the pleas for mercy. Now, humanity was showing them what it meant to face a species that did not abandon its own. The wrath of humanity was not blind rage. It was focused, controlled, relentless. Every weapon was fired with purpose. Every maneuver was designed not only to destroy but to protect the colony below. While the Predators wasted ships in desperate charges, the humans moved with discipline, their Dreadnoughts forming an unbreakable wall between the enemy and the survivors on the surface. Minutes turned into hours. The battle raged across orbit, debris scattering in every direction. Predator ships tried again and again to break through, but each time they were cut down. Human railguns tore holes through their hulls. Plasma beams carved them into pieces. Missiles found their targets and shattered them in bursts of light. The Predators had never faced resistance like this. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they began to retreat. But humanity did not let them escape so easily. The Dreadnoughts advanced, pushing the enemy back with overwhelming firepower. Fighters hunted down fleeing ships, disabling engines, leaving them helpless for the finishing blows. Humanity's wrath was not only about survival, it was about sending a message. Below, in the ruins of the colony, survivors looked up through smoke-filled skies. For days, they had only seen the shadows of Predator ships circling above, heard the thunder of bombardments, and felt the despair of being forgotten. Now, the heavens burned with a new light. They saw the fire of Dreadnought cannons streaking across the stars, the explosions of enemy ships breaking apart like falling suns. They heard the rumble of battle and knew it was not their enemies this time. It was salvation. Children clung to their parents, asking, "Who are they?" And the answer, whispered with tears, was simple: humans. They came. Back in orbit, the Predator fleet finally began to collapse. Their ships broke apart, their formations scattered. Some tried to flee into the void, but the Dreadnoughts hunted them down. Humanity had unleashed its fury, and the Predators could not withstand it. One by one, the hunters were destroyed, until the only things left orbiting the planet were burning wrecks and the silent hulks of defeated warships. The battlefield grew quiet. Smoke and debris drifted, glowing faintly in the starlight. The human Dreadnoughts remained, scarred but unbroken, their weapons cooling, their engines steady. The crews stood at their stations, exhausted but proud. They had answered the SOS, and they had done more than arrive. They had turned the tide. In the aftermath, the Admiral spoke across all channels, her voice carrying to every ship in the fleet and even to the colony below. The Predators are broken. The colony lives. Humanity has answered. Cheers erupted across the Dreadnoughts. Soldiers pounded their fists on tables. Pilots whooped inside their cockpits. Medics smiled through their exhaustion. Even on the burning surface below, survivors raised their hands to the sky, crying with joy. For the first time in weeks, they believed in tomorrow. The wrath of humanity was not cruel, not mindless. It was the fury of a people who refused to let others suffer alone. The Predators had believed themselves unstoppable. Now they knew the truth. Humanity was not a prey species. Humanity was not weak. When pushed, when called, when forced to choose, humanity could become the storm. And that storm had just torn the Predators apart. The battle was finally over, but the real work had only begun. The Predators were gone, their ships burning wrecks drifting in the silence of space. But down on the planet, millions of people still struggled to survive among the ruins. Fires burned across the cities, buildings lay broken, and the air was filled with smoke and ash. The survivors had endured the nightmare of occupation, and now they waited, unsure if salvation had truly come. From orbit, the human Dreadnoughts opened their hangars. Dropships and shuttles poured out like silver rain, streaking down through the atmosphere. Each one carried soldiers, medics, supplies, and engineers. Humanity's wrath had crushed the Predators, but now it was humanity's compassion that took charge. When the first dropships landed, survivors gathered cautiously, fear still etched in their faces. For weeks they had only seen Predator soldiers, brutal and merciless, marching through their streets. They expected more cruelty, more commands shouted in alien tongues. But instead, when the hatches opened, they saw humans in armor stepping out. Familiar faces, familiar flags, and voices that spoke their language. A child was the first to move. He broke free from his mother's arms and ran forward, calling out. A soldier knelt, arms open, and caught him. Others followed, slowly at first, then in a flood. Families rushed forward, tears streaming, as soldiers dropped their weapons to embrace them. "Don't worry," one medic said, kneeling beside a wounded man. "You're safe now. We've got you." The survivors wept. For so long they had felt abandoned, their SOS a desperate cry they thought would never be answered. And now, standing before them, were the Dreadnought crews who had crossed the stars to protect them. The promise was real. Humanity did not forget its own. Everywhere the soldiers spread, helping hands followed. Engineers began restoring power grids, setting up clean water systems, and clearing rubble. Medics moved through the crowds, treating injuries, distributing food, and comforting the sick. Pilots flew air patrols, ensuring no predator ship dared return. The colony, once filled with despair, began to breathe again. In the ruins of a school, a group of children huddled together, silent and afraid. A soldier approached carefully, lowering his helmet so they could see his face. He smiled and offered them chocolate bars from his pack. At first, the children hesitated. Then one reached out, took the gift, and tasted it. His eyes widened. The others followed, their fear replaced by laughter. For the first time in months, their world felt like home again. Up above, the Admiral watched the rescue unfold on her command screens. Reports came in from every sector, injured civilians located, predator weapons secured, survivors gathered. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also the warmth of pride. Humanity had answered the SOS with fury, but now they answered with love. This was what it meant to be human. Not just to fight, but to heal. On the surface, soldiers and colonists worked side by side. Burnt-out buildings became shelters, landing zones became medical camps, and shattered streets echoed with the sound of rebuilding. Where predator banners once hung, human flags now flew. Every survivor carried scars, but now those scars were touched with hope. In one ruined district, a young woman stood before the soldiers and spoke for her people. Her voice trembled, but it carried strong. "We thought we were alone. We thought no one would come. But you came. You fought for us. You saved us. We will never forget." The soldiers bowed their heads. They had not come for thanks. They had come because it was right, because no human voice crying in the dark should go unheard. Still, the woman's words burned in their hearts like fire. The predators had believed fear was stronger than hope. They had believed that by crushing a colony, they could silence humanity. But instead, they had awakened something greater. The colony survivors would remember this day not as the day they were abandoned, but as the day humanity returned for them. Night fell over the planet, but for the first time, lights glowed in the cities again. Power lines sparked back to life, clean water flowed through broken pipes, and fires were replaced with the glow of beacons. Families huddled together under the protection of human soldiers, no longer fearing the sound of footsteps outside their shelters. The dreadnoughts remained in orbit, their massive silhouettes watching over the world like guardians. For every survivor, those ships became symbols. They were not just machines of war, they were proof that humanity's strength stretched across the stars, ready to rise whenever needed. In the quiet moments after the rescue, when the chaos had settled into order, the Admiral stood at a window aboard her ship. She looked down at the planet, at the tiny lights flickering back to life, and thought of the message that had started it all. A desperate SOS, faint and fragile, had crossed the stars. And humanity had answered, not with one ship, but with dreadnoughts, massive, unstoppable, unyielding. The rescue was not just about saving lives. It was about proving a truth that echoed across the galaxy. Humanity never abandoned its own. When one cried out, all answered. When one fell, the others rose to catch them. The predators had learned the wrath of humanity in battle. Now they would hear of its compassion in victory. And as dawn rose over the scarred planet, survivors stood tall once more. They were no longer broken, no longer forgotten. They had been rescued. And in their hearts, they knew this was only the beginning. Because humanity had shown the galaxy something unforgettable. A promise that no SOS would ever go unanswered again. The planet was quiet now. The echoes of battle had faded, the fires were under control, and the people were slowly beginning to rebuild their shattered lives. But what happened here was not going to remain a secret. Across the galaxy, whispers of the event were already spreading. An SOS had been sent, a desperate cry for help that no one else dared to answer. And yet, humanity had come, not with one ship, not with a token gesture, but with an entire fleet of dreadnoughts. The survivors knew their rescue was not just about them. It was something larger, something that would echo across the stars. They had seen humanity's power, but they had also seen its compassion. The soldiers who brought food, the medics who healed the sick, the engineers who rebuilt shelters. These actions carried just as much weight as the destruction of predator warships. For every survivor, a seed of faith had been planted. They would tell their children, and their children would tell the next. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not abandon. On the orbiting flagship, the admiral stood in silence, staring down at the recovering colony. She knew the mission was over, but she also knew this was only the beginning of something far greater. What had happened here would become a story, an example that would inspire others. Already, other colonies and allied worlds were listening. Some who had doubted humanity, some who had feared them, were now beginning to see them differently. Messages poured in from across human space. From Earth, from Mars, from distant stations at the edge of known space. Praise, relief, and gratitude came flooding in. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of predators who preyed on the weak. But now, everyone knew that if one human world was attacked, others would rise to defend it. Humanity was not scattered and alone. They were united. Down on the surface, survivors began to write their own records. Some carved words into stone memorials, some painted walls with messages, and others recorded holograms for history. They wanted to ensure no one would forget the day the Dreadnoughts came. The story would not just belong to them. It would belong to all of humanity. Children who had once hidden in ruins now played under the protective gaze of human soldiers. Families who had lost everything found hope again as supply ships delivered food and materials. Slowly, life returned to the colony. And every night, the survivors would look up at the sky and see the Dreadnoughts shining like stars, reminders of their salvation. But the legacy went beyond this single planet. The predators who had dared to strike now faced a terrible truth. They had believed humans were soft, divided, and easy prey. Instead, they discovered that an attack on one human colony was an attack on all. Their fleets had been destroyed, their pride shattered, and their reputation ruined. Fear spread through their ranks. Other predators, watching from afar, thought twice before making the same mistake. The galaxy was changing. Where before there had been doubt, now there was certainty. Humanity was no longer just another species struggling to survive among the stars. They had proven themselves as protectors, warriors, and guardians of their own kind. The SOS was not just a call for help. It became a symbol of unity. The admiral, reflecting on the mission, gathered her crew and spoke simple words that would later be repeated across space. We came because we had to. We came because no human stands alone. Let this be remembered, not as our victory, but as our promise. Those words were carried to every human world, replayed again and again, becoming a vow etched into their history. Years later, the colony thrived once more. New buildings stood where ruins had been, children learned in schools rebuilt with the help of human engineers, and markets buzzed with trade again. But one place was left untouched, the crater where the first predator bombardment had struck. There, a monument rose. It was not just stone and metal, but a symbol. At its base were the names of every survivor, every rescuer, and the date the Dreadnoughts had answered. Above it, carved into shining steel, were the words, "No SOS goes unanswered." Travelers who visited the colony would come to see that monument. They would stand in silence and remember. And when they returned to their homes, they would carry the story with them. The legend spread, carried on trade routes, encoded in songs, told in whispers at distant stations. The predators had tried to break a world, but instead, they had given birth to a story that made humanity stronger. The Dreadnoughts themselves became legendary. Each ship that had taken part in the rescue carried a mark on its hull, a symbol showing its role in the mission. For their crews, it was not just a mark of battle, but of honor. Whenever those ships entered a system, people looked up with respect and pride. They were not just machines. They were symbols of unity, of the promise humanity had made to itself. And so, the legacy of the SOS lived on. It was more than a cry for help. It was proof that across the endless stars, no matter how far apart humans lived, They were one people, bound not just by blood, but by loyalty, compassion, and an unbreakable promise. The predators had wanted to erase a colony. Instead, they had forged a legend. A story that would travel farther than any warship, stronger than any weapon, and brighter than any star. The survivors never forgot the sound of the dreadnoughts arriving, the roar of their engines filling the skies, the sight of their weapons tearing apart the predator fleet. But what they remembered even more were the hands that lifted them up, the voices that comforted them, and the feeling of safety that returned after so much fear. Generations later, when children asked about the great battle, their elders did not speak first of destruction or death. They spoke of the moment the sky filled with human ships, the moment hope returned, and the moment they realized what it truly meant to belong to humanity. The SOS had been desperate. It had been sent into the void, a cry to anyone who might listen. And it had been answered with overwhelming force, unstoppable determination, and endless compassion. That was the legacy left behind. And in every corner of the galaxy, the lesson was clear: humanity listens. Humanity answers. Humanity never forgets its own.